Welcome back to Contacts. We are joined today by long-term mentor Lundy Smith, water polo and swimming coach at Phillips Exeter Academy. Coach, thanks for jumping on with me today.
Great to be here, Justin. It's just great catching up after all these years.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, let's dive in. So if you don't mind taking us through your background as a coach, how'd you end up coaching and what was the process of you landing your first job and any subsequent jobs?
If you want to go way back, I started out as a kid who just hung around pools a lot and started swimming. I was hyperactive, so my parents would take me down to the municipal pool and drop me off for lessons, and then I'd stay the whole day just swimming at the pool. And then they discovered swimming, a swimming team in town, so I jumped on that when I was 8 years old, and that led to lifeguarding jobs and then coaching summer league teams throughout high school. And then I went off to college at Pomona, where I started. I played water polo and swam for 2 of the seasons I was there. Played water polo for all 4, and then in my senior year, the local high school, Claremont High, which Mark McGuire and his brother Dan McGuire both graduated from. They needed a swimming coach. So my first real kind of official high school job came in the senior year of my graduation year in 1986, and ended up coaching a bunch of really some very high-end swimmers at Claremont High School. And from there, it's coaching actually opened the door for my first teaching job at Stevenson. I didn't have a job, and Bill Hankeson, there was an alum from Pomona who was actually an AD, head of school, at the Midland School, Eric Swain. And he didn't have any jobs, and he said, and then he called me and he said, well, the Stevenson School, they're looking for somebody, and they may be able to use you for the water polo and swimming. And that's basically how I got my foot in the door at Stevenson. And then Bill Hankeson, God bless him, one of the first things he said to me was, you need to make yourself really useful so they don't have a reason to get rid of you. I mean, it was really wise advice. So I coached water polo with Jeff Mink my first year there, and I was doing mainly the JV and assisting the varsity. And then Bill pulled me on board to do girls frosh soft basketball because he was coaching the varsity team. And after that, I just started, picking up coaching wherever I could. That led to my next job, St. Andrew's School out in Delaware. They just built a brand new pool, and they were looking for a swimming coach and English teacher. And, I fit the bill again. And actually, when I got there, I actually coached boys JV soccer. Actually, it was 4th team soccer. It was, one of those schools where every kid had to do a sport every term. And the headmaster came to me and said, you're going to coach soccer. And I said, I don't know anything about soccer. I've never played soccer. I don't know the rules of soccer. And he says, I don't care. It's a good way for you to get to know the kids. And so he had every new hire he hired, he made them coach the fall season to get them to know people in a different way. And so at St. Andrews, I not only was the varsity swimming coach, I was coaching 4th team boys soccer, which is we're talking about the kids. When you're at a school of 270 kids, they didn't go out for football, they didn't go out for cross country, and they didn't make the varsity or the JV team, and they didn't make the 3rd team. We're talking about and our only win we had was against a 5th grade team. And I think we won something like 11-7. It was almost like a football score. But it was great because you got to know the kids, and that's the reason I think I've stayed in boarding school coaching and teaching all my life, is because of the connections you make with kids outside of the classroom, outside of the pool, or outside of the sporting goods world, the other sports world. That's a long kind of meandering.
And then you jumped to Exeter, and what have you been doing there since you arrived?
Well, Exeter I kind of lucked out and got the job. I was down in St. Andrews, and I lost my father in the fall of '99, and my mom had Alzheimer's, and she was out in Oregon and I was in Delaware. So I just decided to kind of take a year off from teaching and do a kind of self-imposed sabbatical, self-funded sabbatical, in which I took care of my dad's estate, and my sister, who's a lawyer, we got my mom into an Alzheimer care unit. And I was looking for a job, and Exeter called. And, it was the first time. And I thought, oh yeah, they must want me for some kind of swimming and water polo and English. And they didn't care at all. And in fact, when I got here, it was, Roger Necton, who was the head boys swimming coach and water polo coach, and also track and field coach, kind of a legendary figure in the water polo and swimming world in the East. And he brought me on to help out and do the JV boys. And then I did JV girls swimming in the winter, and I did varsity girls water polo. First year we had a varsity girls water polo team in the spring. And so, and I've stayed in coaching for, every year. I've been here 20 years. I did 3 seasons at one point, which was in New England is a big deal because it's driving to Connecticut on Saturdays. It's, you're talking about a 6-hour hole in your day or an 8-hour hole in your day. And then when I became department chair of the English department, I went down to just doing swimming. And that's what I've been doing in girls varsity. Picked it up solely 4 years ago now.
Well, it's interesting because I would imagine many of our listeners don't understand the boarding school world, in that you are teaching, certainly, and also coaching, possibly something that you don't have experience in. And the whole genesis of this podcast was to provide a database of mentors to try to help our young, potentially inexperienced faculty members along in their coaching journey. So I appreciate you sharing that. You coach multiple different sports. The comment that Hankerson shared with you, which is make yourself useful. And I would echo that. Recession-proof yourself, figure out ways to say yes to everything, and eventually you'll find your niche and what you're good at. I'm curious, though, even with all of that experience, different sports, different teams, different levels, when you first became a head coach, what did you still need to figure out? What did you realize right away that you had no idea about?
Oh my gosh. I think as a young coach, one of the things when I see a young coach who's got things figured out, I'm so jealous, because I've come across a few of them, and they're just, for whatever reason, there's a grace about them in the classroom and on the playing fields that I say, God, I wish I had that. And I think one of the things that youth can be wonderful because you're enthusiastic and you want to do as much as possible, and the school is going to use a young teacher as much as they can. But I think, if I look back on it, I think part of it, when I started teaching at Stevenson at age 22, the seniors were 18. Part of, I think the biggest mistake I made was trying to become an authoritarian figure, trying to hold authority. And I also think I was part of what we do as teachers and coaches. I think we fall back on how we were coached and how I was taught, and not reflecting upon maybe, well, did I ever think about how I was coached? Did I really like how I was coached? You just kind of fall back on what you knew. And so I'd say some of the traps I fell into was not kind of taking a look at the team and figuring out what's going to best serve them. I was just, taking a cookie cutter approach, which is like, well, this is, it's like we've run the motion offense for 35 years and we're going to still, it's like this idea. And I've run across coaches like that. A person I coach with here who would, literally pull workouts out of a filing cabinet. And it's like, well, it's September 4th. We're going to do the September 4th workout. And it's like, but we don't have those kids anymore. You know what I mean? It's like, and I found that I would say that my coaching looks different. It goes through kind of, they change my approach, and I change the way I do things every couple of years. I mean, I just think back I look back at some of my old workouts and I'm thinking, wow, that was really interesting. And sometimes I find little nuggets. And also, I've been doing this for 35 years now. What's interesting is you start to see some things coming back, that were abandoned, in the 80s, that are also coming back. in the 2000s, 2020s, 2010s.
Yeah. Well, on that note, since you have been doing it so long in many different places, many different levels and sports, what would you say is the best thing you do in your program that creates the largest ripple effect on your culture, right? What's the thing that's going to go with you no matter what the next stop is because of the impact it has?
This is not some big coaching secret, but boy, I make sure to get as much joy into the drudgery of practice as much as possible. And I think that Doc Councilman, the great swimming coach, this was kind of an instinctual coach, and there are people and living in a boarding school, and I have to say, being a teacher and going through a classroom day and knowing how tired I am and realizing that the kids had 2 more classes than I even did, and they had to do all this extra studying. So one of the things I think I've really changed is just trying to get the feel of the team and knowing how to bring joy in. And I actually work with my captains on this, and I work with my assistant coach on this. And we literally will we'll be sitting there thinking, man, they look tired, or and so we try to find goofy things to kind of completely surprise them. And to lighten things up. And a perfect example is last year we had one of our first big snows, and we were right in the heart of getting our season kicked off. We had a huge competition coming up within a couple of days, and the captain said to me, he said, "What if we had a snowball fight today?" And so, and I thought in years past, I would have flipped. I would have said, "No." And I let them have a snowball fight, and they had a blast. And they, posted photos, and you could feel the energy that carried into it. In our next practice was so much more lively, and our team was, they were still carrying the fun of that moment, and they were talking about it for weeks. So, kind of generating joy is one of the things I'm constantly doing, because I think also school has changed for kids, and the pressures on getting into the colleges. And I think we're in a, you're in these prep schools where the purpose is the parents are paying money to say, we're hoping you can prepare them to get them into great schools for the most part. And the kids take that pressure on. And I also think a lot of them now, I think you can appreciate this, is, how many 3-sport athletes do you have at your school these days compared to what you had 25 years ago or 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago? And you have kids and parents putting all their eggs in one basket. Like, ice hockey out here is huge, and lacrosse, and, these different things and if that doesn't pay off, it's, you see these kids just being kind of crippled by disappointment.
Yeah, no, I think that is a very good point, and something that I intentionally push back against and lead the department from that lens, which is, look, you're going to play as many sports as possible, and here's why. And actually, within my own household, there's only 2 non-negotiables, which are you're playing 3 sports a year and you're going on the 11-day backpacking trip. Outside of that, I don't care what you do. And I think to your point, one, it doesn't put all the eggs in the basket, but it also teaches you how to be part of a team when you're potentially playing a different role, right? You might be the dude on one team, and on the other team, you're the end of the bench athlete, and you got to figure out a way to have an impact. So I think that's a really good point to bring up. And the idea of joy, keeping it fun, 100% when we're young, it's all about strategy and tactics, and we can't sacrifice practice time, and everything is outcome dependent. And then we get a little older and it's like, wait, we're supposed to be enjoying this the same way the kids are. So really.
Yeah. And it's funny is Lars Tiffany, of course, who started his career at Stevenson, and now the UVA coach. And he was up at Exeter a couple of years ago recruiting back when he was still Brown. And such a great, we've known each other, and so I'm just chatting with him, and he was talking about the same thing on lacrosse. But what's interesting to me is I'll have coaches who'll say, "Oh, we love kids who haven't put all their intensity into one thing, or all their swimming. We love it." And it's the same thing with college admissions. You'll have these Ivies saying, "Well, we want a really well-rounded kid," but then the kids, their admissions policies don't always reflect what they say their philosophy is, which is frustrating. And I'll one more quick story is when I was coaching water polo, Last day of cuts, this kid showed up who had been cut from soccer, and he was a really good ice hockey player, and he could barely swim. And and he said, "I want to try out." And I said, "Well," and I said, "Okay." And he said, "Yeah." And he went over and jumped into the pool and did a cannonball. And I said, "Okay, I'm keeping that kid no matter what, because he's funny." And
Right.
it turned out to be one of the best decisions of my life in terms of that, coaching there, because he became he was a hockey player, couldn't swim to save his life, but he saw angles, and he would make these unbelievable assist passes.
Right. Right.
Like, he was always thinking, he was thinking like a hockey player. It was
Yep.
awesome.
Yep. Well, I think, again, as you brought up, that is something that is very much falling by the wayside, unfortunately, and I'm hoping that we can work hard to bring it back, as the value it adds to these kids' lives is exponential. What have you learned watching other teams that aren't aquatics that you have been able to apply?
I love, first of all, I'm kind of a gym rat, and the fact that I actually, as a coach, I constantly like going to watch people coach. And I've, in the last couple of years, I've gone down to watch other swimmer. A guy I coached against down in Delaware, Bruce Gemmell, who is now was Katie Ledecky's coach. I went down and watched his practices. I like going and talking to our basketball coach about what he does, because he's running a pretty good program.
Mm-hmm.
The volleyball coach for both boys and girls here, and it's interesting to see, especially at the level, our basketball team gets in a lot of ready-made players. They're really top end.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the sports here, you have to take a kid who looks like an athlete and turn them into an athlete, or turn them into a decent volleyball player. And I think our volleyball coach, a guy named Bruce Shang, the way he teaches fundamentals,
Mm-hmm.
it is all of a sudden, Exeter was always kind of a good volleyball program, and now they're the kind of the class of the New England they've won so many New England championships since he's taken over the team.
Mm-hmm.
And I watch him constantly take okay players and turn them into really technically sound,
Mm-hmm.
excellent volleyball team players. There's
Mhm.
not, they just keep the ball alive and do everything like that.
Mhm.
So I always learn a lot. And I think about, Andy Ish.
Mhm.
Remember Andy?
Mhm.
And Andy gave me a really interesting coaching. I was watching him coach one time, and it was back when he was helping out Bill, and they were running that, that zone,
Mhm.
man-to-man zone they were running that was so effective.
Mhm.
And Andy was chastising a bunch of players, and he was like, "Number 6, number 10's over here busting his balls for you, and you're just standing there."
Mhm.
I went, and after that, we were kind of watching the practice afterwards, and I said, "I noticed you don't call them by names." He says, "No, it's never personal." And I
Hmm.
do that to make sure they know it's not personal. I'm not calling, Justin out. I'm calling
Right.
number 10. I'm calling number 10 out, the kid who's wearing the jersey. So stuff like that sticks with me to this day. That kind of, because he was really a thoughtful coach, in that way.
Yep. No, absolutely. I was fortunate enough to be around him for one season before he left, but that's a really good point, right? We jokingly in my house refer to my children by their jersey numbers, but it not for that reason. I like the idea of using that to depersonalize corrections and feedback loops. That's something that I think is definitely applicable across the different disciplines.
Right. And I think that's always also, it's always a really interesting balance that you're striking when you're talking about something that's going on, and whether or not you identify the individuals, or if you say, we're going to make this a team
Mm-hmm.
event, we're all going to help each other out in this.
Mm-hmm.
And that, it's always a fine line. And sometimes you have to do a little bit of both, I've found. Address the individual privately. And that's the other thing I think I've learned more than anything else in my years is, if you have an issue with a kid, do it privately.
Yeah.
Talk to them. Don't do it in front of their peers. You're going to shut the door. If you humiliate a kid, or even if your intention is not to humiliate them, as an athlete, you feel naked at times. And when all of a sudden a coach is yelling at you
Mm-hmm.
in front of all your peers, it's public shaming in a way.
No, it is. It's hard. And that's something that, as you mentioned, is a fine line, because if you address the whole group, often the intended target is so clueless, they're not the ones that are receiving it, right? So I
Right.
think, to your point, you're pulling them aside and you're addressing the group to make sure the message hits home. Yeah.
Or your teammate or the other teammates are saying, why is he talking to me? It's
Yeah.
Bill over there who's screwing up.
Besides that, how would you say your approach to coaching has changed throughout your career?
I'm thinking. I mentioned earlier the cookie cutter, and what's come is just trying to, and also falling back on what I learned. And Coach Dave Salo, who was at Nova Aquatics for years and now the head coach at USC, I heard him at a coaching conference, and then I managed to try to go to like 5 more of his conferences, and just kind of glean his brain, and he really introduced me to the idea that one, you have to look at what your team has. Two, if you're bored watching your kids practice, think about how bored they must be. This kind of idea. If you're sending them off on these sets, and if you're running drills that just are drills for the purpose.
Yeah.
And so one of the things he said, and that is stuck with me, and it's true to this day, is I never do anything without telling the kids why we're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
I want everything to be very intentional.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's something else, because it otherwise I think sometimes it's just like, oh, he's run out of ideas, or he's tired and he's recycling something. But you have to say, no, this is specifically for working on this.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's like doing a grammar lesson in English class or something, and you don't understand this, so we need to work on this. And the other thing I've started doing is I've gone to really kind of short. I've become much more I'm embracing really high intensity training with a lot of rest and lots of breaks, because it gives me time to offer corrections. It gives me time to talk to the kids,
Mm-hmm.
rather than saying, we're going, let's swim a set of 10 200s on the
Yeah.
220, where they just face down churning water.
Yeah. Well, I think you're in a unique sport that's almost track-like in that, where the differing approaches that you can try out and see the results over a short time frame is something that I don't know how many people think of it in those ways, right? Where similarly in basketball, the long 3-hour practice is gone by the wayside, and I try to cap everybody in the school now. It's like, hey, 90 minutes. If you can't get it done, you need to get better as a coach.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
how do you figure out how to maximize that time and do things that are keeping the kids engaged and also moving the needle towards the improvement that you're trying to make?
I'll give you another quick example. Is in the spring, I walk my dogs out in the fields, and I was walking by a varsity baseball practice, and they were doing basically a really just the coach was throwing balls, whole group of kids were waiting to hit, and then other kids were fielding.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just this day after day. I see the same thing almost every day. All they did was take live batting practice with kids fielding balls.
And you're like, how inefficient is this?
Right. And then I went by the softball team, and the softball team is coached by one of our school nurses. Mm-hmm. And her team was broken into 5 stations. Mm-hmm. And they were, and it was every kid was getting reps, whistle blow. Everybody just rotated. Mm-hmm. I was thinking, there's a woman who knows how to coach. There's a woman who's keeping these kids engaged. And there was never more than about 30 seconds of downtime for the kids. You just weren't standing there, leaning on a bat or something.
Yeah, no, you learn as you get more experienced in this that reps matter, and standing around in lines is not very efficient. And if you don't learn that, then you're not going to have a whole lot of success. So I think, again, if there are younger coaches listening to this, how can you keep everybody on your team moving at once, doing something that's productive, which then can reduce your practice time and get you towards where you want to go a lot quicker? And I think that's really important. So to that point, and you may have already answered this, maybe you have a different idea, but what would you say you have most recently changed your mind on from a coaching standpoint? I used to think this, now I'm over here, and here's why. To your point of, we got to tell everybody why, because this generation of kids has access to everything and they just want to know why. They're not different than the older kids. It's just not the dictatorial culture that we used to have.
Yeah, I think because I've coached at so many kind of different schools with different philosophies, and I would say, the one thing I've kind of really changed about is I don't care that much about winning in swimming as much as I used to. I don't. And as I say to the kids, and I coach crew at St. Andrews as well. There's another sport I picked up. Because again, the head coach said, "I need somebody to coach. I'll teach you." And I said, "What the heck?" I mean, and it went really well. But this, I tell the kids for example, at a swimming meet, there are 11 events. I have 3 kids per event. I have, plus you have relays. I have at least 100. We have about 100 chances to do something successful on any given day.
Yeah.
And so it's finding, and I think the same is true in a team sport. When you're going up against a high-powered team, I try to set goals that don't necessarily all point towards winning. They point towards success that will lead to winning if they match the goals. And it's what I consider winning. Yeah. And it's everything from designing a set that I know that they can't achieve, but by the end of the season they may achieve. And just saying, so every time we do this one set, I'll repeat a set, and it's not, it's no big deal, and it'll be like 675s kicking, where I want them to, kick to be able to break a minute on the 75. And then I tell my best swimmers, I say, I want you to be able to kick 75 yards as faster than you actually swim the same 100 yards.
Oh, wow.
So and that just becomes a goal. And then they start to see success down the road. And I don't say, okay, I want you to just win this event. So I think it's breaking down things. I don't know if that's not earth shattering. It's just,
it speaks to, again, the maturity and experience and years of work to where the process is the focus rather than the outcome. And I've seen that in myself and others, and try to counsel our younger coaches to not get hung up on the outcome, because that is a result of doing the process piece correctly. And sometimes the outcome isn't a reflection of what you're doing, because you might not have the horses, and it's just about moving the needle.
And especially in a school that is admissions driven, highly selective, plus funding. There's right now we're our application process, and I have I get the data sheet of all the girls listed who are interested in swimming at Exeter. It's 250 kids, and that runs from everything from a kid who's just fills out, I want to do everything, to some really high caliber swimmers. And you realize, okay, if I get these top 10 girls, I'll have this team that's just like unbeatable, but I'll get 2. Yeah. And it was like when I was Stevenson, I had some great water polo teams with Kai and Andy Bozo, Matt Olin, and Matt Slaughterback and Neely Tockett, and we were always like one player short. One guy who couldn't swim.
Yeah. Well, and that's the nature of the beast sometimes, especially in schools like ours, where I have described it to others as our ones can go head to head with anybody. We matriculate as many student athletes to collegiate athletics as anyone in our area. We just don't have the same depth. So when you're lining up to play football and the team across has 50 guys and you have 25,
right,
it's not going to end well once you get to halftime, because it's a war of attrition in that sport, right? And I think the same can be said for any of these other sports, right? You got a couple of top end kids, and you've got some kids that are learning the sport for the first time, and they're on the same team, and bringing that together takes a special amount of awareness, of perspective, and skills to keep the focus on what's important.
And I would say to coaches too, you have to find a way to be authentic in the face of losing. In other words, you just can't say, "Oh, nice try. I'm so happy we did it." They'll see through your bullshit right away. And but if you're clear about what constitutes a victory in the face of a loss, or if you're clear of what you're saying, no matter what happens today, I want to see us do blank. We've been working on this. That should be able to do, so it's really, and I think swimming is a lot easier in that regard, because it's all about time, or it's all about technique, and it's not about, running the play or something like that. But I think kids, they need to understand, I think a coach needs to be authentic with the kids so they can understand when you're truly happy and proud with them, rather than just kind of putting on an act. And they're smart. They're smarter than we are. They know that.
Yeah. And that's, I think, the deal. How do you define success for your particular situation in any given season, month, day, and figuring out what that is? It's not always the cut and dry black and white of you won or you lost. There's a million variations of that gray space that show up as you get a little older. Last question, and you can answer this however you want, because it may not fit in the way it's framed. But if you were starting over today, what would you do differently, and or what piece of advice would you give your younger self?
Oh my gosh. First of all, I would just say it's not about you. Number one, it's not about you, and it's not about, and I think back to my early days, and I realized, like, it's all compensating for your own feelings of inadequacy. And gosh, I remember that, I was coaching girls basketball, and then did some boys JV with you on the team, and just being so distraught when I got home, and just realizing how badly I'd been out coached. And, and I didn't even understand what the other coach was doing to me till after the game, that kind of thing. And, part of that wisdom just comes with years and mileage. And, I would say you've got to attach yourself to a mentor more than anything else, an older coach. And, you're lucky if you have a good one. Like, again, Andy Ish wasn't really my mentor, but he was a guy who willingly, when I said, "Can I watch your practice? Can I do this?" he said yes. In fact, I've done this a lot. I wrote John Tanner, who's the Stanford women's water polo coach. I've been out to his practices and actually, just shadowed his practices for 4 or 5 days on my spring break. When I was taking over St. Andrews, there was a diving team, and I know nothing about diving. So I wrote Ron O'Brien, who was Greg Louganis's coach down in, and he said, "Well, I'll come up and work with your," and what I tell people is, especially younger coaches, is reach out to the best people that you know of in the business and see what they say. The worst thing they're going to say to you is no, or they're not going to answer your email or whatever. But it's amazing how, I think in my community of swimming and water polo and everything else, just how generous older coaches are with time and with help. Plus, I also read a lot of books, coaches' books on other sports. I loved Pat Summitt's books on coaching basketball. I think I learned a lot about coaching swimming from reading Pat Summitt. I also, I'm always in awe when I see, I would go watch Jovan Vavic coach, who's, arguably the best water polo coach in the country, who came down in the whole USC paying for admissions scandal and now serving time. But, I would watch him just scream at his players, and I was thinking, I would never want to send a kid I would be crying if I were on his team. How does he do that? And I'm always kind of intrigued watching a coach. And I do the same. When I go to an NBA game, or I watch an NBA game on TV, I am super interested in what they do in the huddle. I am super interested in how they talk. And, another really interesting example is a couple of years ago, one of my advisees in the dorm, her father was the head hockey coach for the Florida Panthers. And so when the Panthers played in Boston, we got to go sit right down on ice. And it was fun. And then meet the players afterwards. And I was talking to him after the game, and I was saying, what's it like? And he's saying, well, I have a 17-year-old rookie. My goalie's 36. And I've got kids. I've got kids who are not of yet drinking age. I've got other people in their 20s, and I've got these older men. And he said, and he was constantly figuring out ways to kind of bring them together. And so, like, they have film night, or they go to a movie night. And then he said, I've rented out the ice in Central Park for a shinny hockey game. I haven't told them about it. It's going to be a surprise. And I was thinking, it's really interesting because that's something we don't think about except in the terms of, oh, I've got a 9th grader and I've got a 12th grader.
Mm-hmm.
How do we build team around this? And I was thinking, here he has a 17-year-old and a 36-year-old.
Yeah.
And he'll do stuff like he said, I'll make the 36-year-old room with the 17-year-old.
Yep, absolutely. Well, and that's the deal that I think is great advice. It's not, hey, this is what I would do differently. It's realize early that it's not about you as the coach. And that's a hard thing to do until you get to a place where you feel secure enough that you know that it's not about you. And I don't even know the right way to hack that to get there quicker, but I mean, maybe enough people say it, then it'll be embraced. And the other thing you pointed out is, let's call it the off the ice, since you use the hockey analogy, time spent is probably the most valuable into creating the ligature within the team that will hold it together when things don't go well. And I was just reminded, I was rereading this article on Greg Popovich the other day, and the dinners. Yeah, and how important those,
at Pomona.
Yep, and how important those dinners have been throughout his career, and why that's such a special linchpin of the Spurs culture. So I think that's really a good thought to add to this.
You know what he did when he was our dorm head when I was at Pomona? He'd have milkshake night, or he'd just have the whole dorm in it. He'd make spin milkshakes, and that was his way of kind of connecting. Yeah, he's a good man. And I would say too to young coaches, drop in on other practices. Ask a coach if you can watch a practice.
Even on your own campus, I think you mentioned earlier, reach out to people, which I would echo. The worst they can say is no, and you don't have it already, so you might as well ask. But more often than not, in my experience of 20 years of this, is you're going to get a yes. People want to share if you are asking authentically and not trying to leverage the relationship into some sort of transaction. So I think that's great advice. And then I think the follow-up is, on your own campus, you have a wealth of access to whatever you want to see. And it could be good, it could be bad. It's informative, right? That's what matters.
Yeah. And I think it's important to be open with your athletes, in terms of what you're doing. And I also, sometimes I'll hear kids saying about something that's going on a team on campus. And, it's also, I think you need to be a good colleague and not treat that as like, oh, you're screwing up, but rather than saying, hey, you might want to be aware of this. So,
yep, absolutely. Building those relationships helps that.
Right.
Yeah. Well, this has been awesome, Coach. Thanks for being here. Lots of pearls of wisdom that people can take and learn from and grow. And so I thank you for taking the time to share those with us.
Thank you, Justin. It's been great catching up. God, I'll have to get back out there and see everybody again. It's been so long.
Absolutely. Once we get to the other side of COVID.
All right.